Today we're going over on how to test and replace an EVAP bypass solenoid valve. You may have an EVAP code regarding some kind of leakage and you need to test different components. So that's what we're doing today. And a couple days ago we did the EVAP canister purge valve. So over the next maybe week or so we will go over a number of different EVAP components. So if you do have a leakage, you'll have a pretty good idea on how to tackle everything. So let's begin. Now, testing the valve is simple enough. This is a vacuum pump. This costs less than $35 off Amazon, and as always I'll have a link in the description box below in case you do need one of these. Now, before we jump underneath the vehicle, let's just turn on the ignition key. So I'm not starting the car, I'm just turning on the ignition. Now typically you'll find the EVAP components toward the rear of the vehicle. So this is the driver's side rear tire. Right here is your EVAP canister. So inside here is charcoal that stores fuel vapors, and then eventually these vapors are sent to the engine to be burned off. But if we keep on looking up, right here we have a two-way valve. And fastened to this valve is the bypass solenoid valve. So it's two separate things. So before we clean this up so you can see a much better view of what's really going on here, we're going to test the valve. So we have two rubber hoses we need to remove. We're going to remove the top one and the bottom one. Okay, a pair of pliers, remove the clamp, and then to break these loose, I have a hose removal plier, also purchased off Amazon, and then you can simply break the connection loose. Okay, same with this, pull this off. Okay, now we need the vacuum tester. So this is just a piece of hose I have in the garage. The vacuum tester does include vinyl tubing as well, but I'm just going to use this because it's incredibly long. And then with the opposite end, just insert it into the vacuum tester and then just apply some vacuum and see if it holds. And as you can see, this is holding vacuum perfectly well. So this verifies that the bypass solenoid valve and also the two-way valve works. But if you do this test and you're essentially just slowly losing vacuum, or it's simply not holding vacuum, then you have a problem either with the bypass valve or the two-way valve, and I'll show you how you can decipher both of them. Now to do that, let's first clean this up. I'm actually going to remove it from the vehicle. Now I'm going to start by removing the EVAP canister. It simply cleans up the entire area, and then we'll have better access to the valves. Now the EVAP canister is simply held in by one 12mm fastener, and then on the other end it simply slides into that bracket. Okay, two more lines to remove. We have this line and then the main. This is the main line that runs to the fuel tank. These can be a little hard to remove sometimes. There's a tab, you press down on the tab hard, then you have to pull back. So once again, I'll use the pliers, the hose removal pliers, just to break loose any hoses here. And then again, this one, press really hard. Okay, there we go. So make sure everything is disconnected along with harness connectors and just gently pull it back. And there is the EVAP canister. And with that canister removed, they also removed the tire to get some more light filtering in here. We have a much better access and viewpoint of what's going on here. So our two-way valve, and then over here is where the bypass solenoid is. So let's remove it from the mount. This one here, another one right here. Let's see. Just slide it off. And then there's actually two things going on here. Up top, that is a fuel tank pressure sensor, and then this is the connection for the bypass solenoid valve. So I'm going to disconnect both. At the 12 o'clock position, there's a tab. Press down on the tab. and pulling the body. I'll have to put the camera down to hold this in place. So I just had to put the camera down there for a moment to remove these two harness connectors again. You see how there's a tab? Press down, pull back, press down right here, and pull back. So now we have the entire assembly here on the bench, and this is something I like to do in videos. Remove the components from the vehicle, place it on the bench, and you can clearly see how everything is held together. So once again, two-way valve. This is where we hooked up the vacuum tester. Here's our bypass solenoid, which we will test very quickly. And this is a fuel tank pressure sensor. I'll go into this in a separate video. So now, if you recall, we applied vacuum and the vacuum held. But let's say you have a trouble code for a small EVAP leak, such as 1456, 1457. You know that this is holding pressure, but let's just double check and make sure that this valve is working correctly. So here I have a digital multimeter, again inexpensive. This runs for $20 off Amazon, and every multimeter, whoops, they have two leads, a red lead and a black lead. Okay, so you just plug in the leads, super simple, and whoops, I got that backwards. And on the multimeter, we want to do an ohms or a resistance test. So that is the omega symbol on the meter. So just place it to that setting. Okay, this is ready to go. Now take a look at the solenoid. You have two small metal prongs in there. So all that you're doing is taking the two leads from the multimeter and touching these prongs. Now just to make things easier, I always use these, it's just a wire with two alligator ends on them. And this just makes it easy. Make sure I got the right one here. Okay. This makes it easy to test sensors, valves, and that sort of thing. Okay, so this is ready to go. And then just taking the other lead, one to black, one to red, and let's see if we have a reading. And we have roughly 35 ohms. So this is a working valve. Now we know for sure the two-way valve works and the bypass solenoid has a good reading. Now, the reason why you want to do this again is because with small leak codes, there's a lot of things you have to check. Also, a very good time to just replace your rubber hosing since you're here. Now, one last thing very quickly that you also want to check if you do have a trouble code is if power, let me clean this up, if power is getting to the solenoid valve. In other words, that harness connector. Let's make sure that we don't have a blown fuse. But if you do need to replace this, it's easy enough. You just have two fasteners. I'm not going to remove it because I'm just doing this as a how-to, but just remove these two fasteners. This comes off, reinstall it, and that's it. But let's jump back over to the vehicle. So right here is the harness connector for the bypass valve. This is for the fuel tank pressure sensor. So this is the correct one. And all that I have is a little probe that you simply just insert into the harness connector, okay? Now you can use a paper clip as well, but I just happen to have these that I purchased off Amazon, of course. Now I need to just turn on the ignition key. So once again, we have the multimeter, and we need to do a volts DC, okay, not AC. You make sure it's on the DC setting. And then, let me just show you very quickly. I have, again, the red lead coming from that multimeter. And I have a little adapter here that just clips on. There we go, clips onto that. And the opposite end, hold on. I feel like Danny Glover from Lethal Weapon. Oh, I'm getting too old for this stuff, but right here is where it just simply connects into. So now we have a good connection, and then looking at the multimeter, once again, you also have the black lead. Now black goes to ground. Ground is any good metal point, for example, exhaust manifold, heat shield on the exhaust. Also, since we're at the rear, right here there's a spring for the handbrake inside the vehicle. So I'll just place this right in there, okay? And look at the meter. and we should see battery voltage. We're at roughly 5 millivolts, so that's not right. So let's go back over here and check the other side. Okay, let's try this guy. Check the reading. Okay, over here, and here we go. We have roughly 11 battery volts, so this is a good working connection. Now if you do this test but you don't see a reading here, that simply means you have a blown fuse and you just need to remove the fuse and replace it. Now to check for fuses, you'll find an underhood relay and fuse box. Okay, so you have a number of fuses right here. It probably will be something like a 15 to 30 amp fuse. You also have one inside. Okay, just look underneath the dash. Right there. So that's how you test an EVAP bypass solenoid valve. If you're doing this from scratch, invest in the $50 and you'll have a vacuum pump for many years and a multimeter, which is a must-have if you plan on working on your own vehicle. And you know, learn about your vehicle, save $100+ an hour to bring it to someone, do the work yourself, and you'll be in good shape. As always, thank you for watching.